Hello and welcome back to Script and Pencils, the comic book creator interview podcast from the Comic Crush. Today we're taking a bit of a sort of slightly sideways look at comics. We're not interviewing a comic creator, but someone who is, very connected to the comics world and inspired by it. Comics are full of passionate fans, and I think the gentleman we're about to talk to is probably one of the most passionate. He's the author of Data and Doctor Doom, An Empirical Approach to Transmedia Characters, which is published by Palgrave Macmillan. It's new out this year, so you can pick that up, and we'll put a link in the description. But the man we're about to chat to is the world's only doctorate holder on Doctor Doom. So we could say Doctor Doom, but I believe he prefers to be called Dr. Mark Hibbett. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi, Paul. I'm very well. Thank you very well indeed. Yes, I do like to be called Doctor of Doctor Doom. It's very exciting.
Have you
ever worthwhile?
Yeah. Have you ever considered legally changing your last name just to fully capitalise on?
I think that would probably be foolish. I think if I was to change my last name to escape the law, then changing it to Doctor Doom would not be the way to go about it.
And also, I'd imagine you'd be subject of many lawsuits from Marvel. I'm sure
from Disney,
be very
interested.
Yeah. So before we get into the book and things, you've obviously got a passion for this particular character and comics, I take it. Can you talk a bit about where that began?
Well, I think same as everybody my age. I mean, I'm in my let's say very, very late 30s, by about 20 years late for being in my 30s. And so I was reading comics in the heyday of British comics in the 70s. So I grew up with, Whizzer and Chips, and then moved on to the 2000 AD. And then I remember going to newsagents to buy my comics and just seeing these American things sitting there on the bottom row, and just in this weird random order, strange comics that didn't seem to follow on from each other because you'd always get a different batch that were in every week. And so I started reading those and just got really, really excited because this was going late 70s. So I was reading a lot of John Byrne's Fantastic Four back then, which was amazing comics. They're still, if you read them now, they're quite hokey, but there's some amazing stuff in those comics. And that really got me into it. And they were cheap then, of course, so you could buy loads of them with your pocket money, which I did. I started going to a comic shop called The House on the Borderland in Peterborough, which was a real proper old-fashioned, smelt very suspicious, that comic shop did. There was possibly, I wouldn't like to say, but I don't think they were just selling comics in those days. It got linked into a whole other world of stuff there, so that's where it all comes from. And I collected the only comic series I ever really properly collected was John Byrne's run on Fantastic Four. So when I started doing my PhD research, it was like I was thinking maybe I could actually make use of all those comics, and so that's where it all came from. And so I like most people, I dropped out during the 90s when comics were terrible, but then I've sort of come back to it since then.
Well, 90s comics are very much in vogue at the moment, and there's a lot of kind of retconning and I don't know what you'd call it, really, nostalgia for 90s comics that seems to be running through the comics medium. I guess it's just its turnaround.
I think it probably is. I think people who grew up with those sort of what would I call them? An interesting form of comics that I think retrospectively we can look back and say, well, this is what they were trying to do. But trying to actually read them at the time wasn't particularly invigorating.
I actually dropped out during that period as well, I have to admit. So came back on towards the end of the 90s. So you kind of, one assumes you sort of felt not a rapport, because I guess it's kind of difficult to feel a rapport with Victor Von Doom, but you felt I don't know, a love for the character. How did that kind of start for you? What was it about that character?
Well, I think it goes back to the way that John Byrne was writing him at the time. I mean, I know we all have there are issues with John Byrne these days, and he is as grumpy as a grumpy old man can possibly get. But I think what he was doing with those Fantastic Four comics back then, possibly even against himself, because I think he was trying to say, I am the inheritor of Lee and Kirby. And he was trying to sort of reenact those old days, but he did lots of really interesting new stuff, kind of almost despite himself. And I think the way he took Doctor Doom and claimed him as his character that he was going to use and develop, and the way that character did develop over those years, he sort of brought together lots of different versions of Doctor Doom into one. And the idea of him being this sort of late Cold War character who was he stood against America, but he also stood against Russia. And there's lots of talk in those days of him being a bulwark against communism, and some really interesting political ideas about American foreign policy are all wrapped up in Doctor Doom around that time. But then also this idea that Doctor Doom has a point. I mean, this is why he works so well as a character, that, well, Doctor Doom's right. I mean, I say Doctor Doom is like Batman, but done sensibly. So Batman's parents are murdered, and Batman takes revenge against them using the resources he's had. Doctor Doom does exactly the same thing, except Doctor Doom's parents are murdered by the state rather than a street villain. And so Doctor Doom uses his resources, which are his amazing intelligence, not billions of dollars of money that he didn't earn, and he uses those to stop this happening to other people by overthrowing the state and installing a government which stops that sort of thing. Whereas Batman built himself lots of weapons so he could go and beat up mentally ill people. And it's like it's a wonderful thing in comics that Batman is the hero, Doctor Doom is the villain, because Doctor Doom sort of took control of an entire nation. And it's like, I mean, I'm aware I've read a lot of Doctor Doom stories, so may have become rather too enamored of our totalitarian ruler Von Doom. But I think it's really, and I'm highly aware of that. But I think it's really interesting in these comics that it's like, well, Batman doesn't ever really change anything. Superheroes, by definition, superheroes cannot change anything. If a superhero actually tries to enact change, like in Watchmen or Squadron Supreme or The Authority or any of those, they become villains. Doctor Doom does.
Well, I think obviously there's Stanley's illusion of change that kind of runs through all of Marvel and by extension all of comics, really. But also, I mean, a lot of comics are interesting when they do make major changes, and you feel that's something that's happened with Doom. You feel that's kind of been allowed to take place. Now, you are talking to someone who has not read many Doctor Doom comics. Right. That's what I'm kind of trying to get into now. So bear with me if I ask questions that might come across as a bit ignorant. But you feel that's something that occurs with this character?
Well, I think for supervillains, it's a lot easier for supervillains to enact change and to be change, because supervillains don't appear on as many lunchboxes as superheroes. So, I mean, it's a lovely thing about comics. It is such a commercial form of art that the lunchbox, the movie franchise, all of these things really do play a part in how their stories work. And with a supervillain, well, you can change a supervillain because they're not going to be part of that quite as much. And you know that when the Fantastic Four film comes out, there will be changes to how the Fantastic Four work, but not many. Whereas Doctor Doom, when you can make him who you want, really, I suspect there'll be more changes to the Fantastic Four themselves than actual Doctor Doom in that. But that's a whole other deal. But what tends to happen in the story world of Marvel Comics or the cartoons is that Doctor Doom can come in and he does make changes. Doctor Doom often wins. There are quite a lot of stories where Doctor Doom wins and does manage to take over the world. And those are really, really interesting stories because, again, I know I've read too many Doctor Doom stories, but generally Doctor Doom does a better job of running the world than other people. And what usually defeats him is admin. So in most of the stories where Doctor Doom wins, honestly, this genuinely happens. There's a couple of stories where he's going, oh man, I've got to go to too many meetings this afternoon, and he sees the superheroes coming. He goes, oh flipping heck, this would be a lot easier. I basically wouldn't have to go to anybody's leaving do if I just let Captain America hit me in the face, and I can just be done with the whole thing. And that happens quite a lot. That tends to be it. that Doctor Doom's. There's a story called Emperor Doom, which is a fantastic story, a hilarious story where Doctor Doom does take over the world. His first act of taking over the world is to get rid of all nuclear weapons. He then ends hunger. He then ends apartheid in South Africa, because that's when this story happens. And then he brings education in for everybody. But in his first day of ruling the world. And when the superheroes win, the superheroes turn all that stuff back. And there's a massive splash page where you see apartheid being brought back, the nations rearming with nuclear weaponry. And there's a brilliant bit where Hawkeye and Captain America are in a Quinjet flying away. And Hawkeye says, as I'm sure most of the readers are saying, do you think we did the right thing there, Cap? And Captain America goes, yes, because freedom matters and we must be free to make our own choices. And you're like going,
no matter how bad, right?
Really? Okay.
Well, I mean, there is one school of thought that says that that sometimes you need a benevolent dictator. I'm just not sure there are too many benevolent dictators out there.
Well, this is the issue. This is very much the issue, I think. Yeah.
What do you think Doom teaches us about the real world? I mean, before we get into the book, I'm sure you've got a lot to say there. What do you think that Doom in particular can teach us?
Well, I think the story of Doctor Doom is one man who tries to do the right thing, and I think the whole point of Doctor Doom, the whole conscious point of Doctor Doom, is his arrogance is always his downfall. That is his constant tragedy. I mean, as an actual capital T tragic character, his downfall is always that he always thinks he's right and will not take the advice of anybody else. So that's that right there in his origin, that we're told that Reed Richards says to Doctor Doom, "Hey there, Victor, I think you've got some of your figures wrong in this experiment." And Doctor Doom says, "No, you're wrong. I'm right. I'm going ahead with the experiment." And that's when the machine that he's built to go into the afterlife to talk to his mother. Comics are great, aren't they? Fantastic. And when that machine explodes because of the incorrect calculations, he blames everybody but himself for that going wrong. And in later years, he decides to blame Reed Richards for tampering with his figures, and we find out that no, that never happened. And then we find out that Ben Grimm may have tampered with the figures, or that may not have happened. But the idea is that the reason his life goes this way and he becomes disfigured, although how disfigured he becomes, we're never sure, but because he has this injury, this inciting incident in his story, that is because of his own arrogance. He would not listen to somebody else's advice. And then all through his career, he's often undone by the fact that other people say, actually, maybe this super annihilator device that will change the world, maybe that won't work. And Victor Von Doom refuses to accept advice, and that is always his undoing.
Do you have I mean, you talked there about the disfigurement and things. And he certainly is a fascinating character, and I feel a certain kind of interest in him. Partly because I can feel the interest in him around me growing. Like there's definitely more people, and I've noticed an uptick when I was working in comic shops last year and some of this year, in people coming in and asking about Doctor Doom stories, which of course Marvel conveniently haven't really made available unless you want to track down the Fantastic Four stuff. Which version of the legend do you prefer? Do you prefer that he might be just that the disfigurement might be something very minor, tiny and fixable, but his own ego has expanded it into something more dire, causing him to wear this armor? Or do you think he is grossly disfigured? What's your headcanon on that?
I think the great Jack Kirby version, which was, so Jack Kirby's idea was that when he had the accident, what happened was he basically had a very small scar on his face, but because of his ego, he was convinced he was now ugly because of this scar. And then, I mean, with a lot of Jack Kirby's ideas of things he invented, I mean, Jack Kirby suggests that he invented Spider-Man, and that's just because, I mean, you can basically go, well, Jack Kirby, you did invent nearly everything, so perhaps you can be forgiven to think you forgetting which ones you did. But I think there's an argument that Jack Kirby didn't necessarily think that right at the start, but it's something that he came onto. And then I say in the John Byrne era, then he sort of adapts that, and he says that, yeah, that is what happened. He did only get lightly scarred. But then obviously not long after that, he goes up into the Tibetan mountains and gets a piece of burning hot metal and presses that against his own face. And nobody's coming away from that unscarred. I mean, that's daft. And again, in that case, the Tibetan monk's going, maybe wait a minute until it's cooled down. And he's going, nope, I'm doing it now. And off he goes. So I like that, because then that brings everything into it. It brings his arrogance and his vanity, thinking that a small scar makes him ugly. But then he does definitely do for his face by pressing this burning hot piece of metal into it. And then he takes it off and he lies face down in some snow, which I don't think is the medically approved way to cure those sort of burns.
Definitely not.
No.
I think he definitely has a legal case there, perhaps. But
he's not a medical doctor. Let's be clear on that.
Perhaps he should have considered the law rather than dictatorship. Do you have a favourite Doctor Doom run or story?
There is one, yeah. There's one called this. I mean, it comes back to John Byrne again, I'm afraid. I keep going on about it.
Absolutely fine.
But there's a story called This Land Is Mine, where what happens is Doctor Doom forces the Fantastic Four to come and help him. Because in a previous story, the Fantastic... I think it's Marv Wolfman and Rich Buckler do a story in Fantastic Four 200, I think, where the Fantastic Four overthrow Doctor Doom and install Prince Zorba as the head of an interim government. And that in itself is an amazing storyline, which is all about the Cold War and American attitudes to Europe and Eastern Europe, and how America is the leader in world peace and the world's policeman, all this sort of thing. Fantastic story. And they install Zorba as the head of government. And then over the next few years, subsequent stories...
Picking up a bit.
Sorry? Yeah,
Mark, I kind of lost you for a little while there.
Okay, where do you want me to go back to?
Let's. So this land is my land. Sorry, and the attitudes towards Eastern Europe. I think we were somewhere there. Sorry, folks at home about that.
That's quite. Yeah. So there's this space. There's a long running story in Marvel Comics around sort of the end of the early 80s, where we keep going back to Latveria every couple of years, and we find out that everything's gone horribly wrong in Latveria without Doctor Doom, because the underlying idea is these Europeans can't govern themselves. These guys, they need a heavy hand upon them to make sure they don't go wrong. And so what happens is Doctor Doom, in This Land Is Mine, Doctor Doom contacts the Fantastic Four and says, well, you've got to come and sort this out. And the Fantastic Four go to Latveria and find that Prince Zorba has become an even worse dictator than Doctor Doom, because he's equally cruel, but he's incompetent as well. So he can't govern. Everything goes horribly wrong. The people of Latveria have demonstrations against him saying, bring back Doom. At least we didn't have to pay taxes under Doctor Doom, because Doctor Doom doesn't need your taxes. He'll just build things and take the money however he wants to. So that's all fine. And so the Fantastic Four have to help Doctor Doom overthrow the leader of Latveria and put him back in place. And it's fantastic, because it's just this whole thing of saying, like, the whole question, like, has Doctor Doom got a point, is played out throughout this entire story. And you hear, and there's John Byrne, he's kind of underrated as a writer, because throughout this, Prince Zorba repeats things that Doctor Doom has said, and Zorba says, this land is mine, it belongs to me. And Doctor Doom overthrows him and flat out kills him. There's a great bit at the end of it where Reed Richards goes, okay, well, we've helped you get rid of this guy. Let's now take him to justice. And Doctor Doom goes, no, I killed him. And it's brilliant. It's perfect Doctor Doomness. It puts the case for Doctor Doom really eloquently in a weird Reagan-era American idea that, well, if a dictator's helping America, he's helping the world. So it's this whole idea of, like, Ferdinand Marcos and all these sort of people, all these people that America propped up. Doctor Doom is doing that. I mean, there's another great story a few years earlier than that, which is advertised as the craziest team-up you've ever heard of. And it's a team-up between Doctor Doom and Henry Kissinger.
Okay, how does that one turn out? I'm curious.
Not well for the Fantastic Four, because Henry Kissinger turns up and says, the Fantastic Four, no, we just signed a treaty with Latveria, so you've got to leave and go home now. And they do, and they turn around and go home because Henry Kissinger. I think there's some kind of political satire going on in that one, but yeah, it's a great story.
Do you feel comics are better with? I know this is somewhat of a sore subject amongst comic readers. Not for me, because I have my own particular feelings on it. But do you think comics are better with real world politics added in, or do you think they should be kept out of comics? I mean, I'm just curious on your opinion.
I don't think you can have comics, particularly Marvel comics, without real world politics, because they're built on them right from the very start of Marvel Comics. Real world politics have always been a part. Well, even before then, Captain America is political. It is impossible to have Captain America without there being some political undertone to it, because it's like whether he is an exemplar of a version of America as a beacon of hope, that is political. There's no way around it. Or whether you're using him, it's like, Nomad in the 70s or any of these ideas. The X-Men are political. There is no escaping this idea. Batman is political. Batman is a billionaire who uses his money to hit people. So I think when people say it shouldn't have real world politics, what they mean is it shouldn't have real world politics that I don't agree with in it. I mean, that's the issue. I mean, Frank Miller does great, crazy versions of comics that have politics in it that I do not agree with. But there's no. Of course, it should be there. That's part of it. So. Yeah, so it's like I think it's. I read people saying last year, why are they bringing politics into Judge Dredd? And it's like, what on earth do you think you've been reading for the past 45 years? For goodness sake!
It was one of the sharpest kind of satires out there on politics. Okay, that answers that. I'm just curious too, because I share a similar view. So I am all for politics entering comics within reason. I think things that can't sort of not disguise but can't engender the comics with a mix of both the fantasy and the factual are probably, on a hiding to nothing. But and some writers can't, but there are plenty that can, and I think they do it very well. Do you think there's a dangerous kind of fascination with people who are perhaps politically motivated in the wrong directions now? I mean, I'm thinking about people like Trump and Farage and those sorts of things, and Putin, who seems to have garnered a staggering amount of support, despite the fact that, in my opinion, of course, but also the opinion of many others, that he just seems to be a nutcase. But do you think that some the fascination, not necessarily your fascination, but a general fascination with these evil characters is somewhat telling of the direction the world is going, or do you think it's just always been there?
I think it has always been there. I think it's worrying that it gets there. Wouldn't it be great if I now said, no, I think Trump is great? That would be
might change the direction of the interview. No, I mean, I'm not here to police people's political views. I'm just curious because it is very much in the ether right now.
I think that kind of totalitarian character has always been with us. I mean, we can go back to whichever decade you like. There have been people like that who say, I have the easy answer. They're out to get you. I'm on your side. Here is the easy answer. It's always, I mean, there is obviously in the 30s, there was a lot of it about in Europe, but then in the 50s in communist countries did exactly the same thing. Stalin did the same thing. All the revolutions across the world, and most revolutions end up with somebody in charge saying, actually, I know what's best for you and I'll do it. And I think it's because, to get philosophical, really, I just think we as human beings hanker after that. We basically want to have responsibility taken away from us and to have somebody else do it. Unfortunately, that's not really how it works in our own lives, in any or in society as a whole, because the people who we put in charge of us will also be humans and will also be fallible. And philosophy has grappled with this problem ever since there's been philosophy, really. Hobbes and Locke and all that. So I did politics my first degree a very, very long time ago. So I remember, like, it's Hobbes' Leviathan, isn't it? And all this idea that we can have, if we could have one great ruler who encapsulated all of us and was able to take decisions for us, we'd be fine. But then, unfortunately, that one great ruler becomes Donald Trump, or it becomes Doctor Doom, or whatever. So I think it's something we'd all like to think there was a benevolent dictator who would sort things out for us. But as comics always tell us, and real life always tells us, there is no such thing as a benevolent dictator.
No, unfortunately not. And I think comics are good for always bringing their worlds to a dangerous precipice and pulling them back, or pushing them over, and then figuring out a way kind of back with that. And I think that's why we like them.
Yeah,
one of the reasons we like them, because it's a perfectly safe kind of danger. Do you think fans can get too passionate about their stories? I mean, obviously, I'm talking to someone who is the only Doctor Doom scholar in the world, I believe. So, and again, it's not meant as a criticism.
No.
Leading question. It's just, do you think we can get too passionate about this stuff?
Well, it depends how we apply that passion, doesn't it? Really, I mean, I think we're all extremely keen on these comics because they're great. I mean, especially with comics, I think the thing is, these usually become to comics as kids, and they inform us. You know, people always say to me, "How do you know so much about certain things?" And you sort of think, well, it's always because I've read it in a comic. Really, pretty much everything I know has been because I read it in a comic. Usually in Alan, a lot of the big words I know are because Alan Moore put big words in Captain Britain when I was reading that. But I think, and it becomes part of us. That is what it is. And so yeah, we are passionate about it and we love it. I think the danger is when we get to a certain age. And there's a tipping point for everybody. For everybody, it's like you get to a certain age and you start to think things used to be better when I was younger. I mean, what it is my knees used to be better when I was younger. My hangovers used to be less evil when I was younger, and we start to extrapolate that into everything. And I think it was comics fans when we start to say, no, what I liked was the good stuff. Nothing can change. And as comic fans, as everybody, we become resistant to change and say, no, you can't make this character a different gender or whatever. You can't do that. And when you start to say that, it's like going, well, that's when it's going wrong. And I think it's difficult to keep your mind and your heart open to that sort of change, because obviously this is the stuff you grew up loving and somebody is mucking around with it. But in most cases, the thing you grew up loving, the reason you loved it in the first place was because somebody had changed something and made it into a different thing. You know, it's like Marvel Man. The Marvel Man that I love is not the Mick Anglo Marvel Man. That is, goodness me, it's not the Mick Anglo Marvel Man that Alan Moore grew up with. He changed it, and that's what I love. If Marvel then came along and made a different version of Marvel Man, I'm pretty sure I would hate it. But I have to. I'd have to appreciate that. Well, they're just doing, the process continues, things change and move on. But it's difficult. It's understandable. It's difficult for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, my fandom is weirdly still pretty much the same as it used to be when I was growing up. I still read essentially the same thing. Yeah. But I have tried to pepper that with a wider kind of knowledge of comics. And now actually I find I'm led to a particular comic, whatever that title may be, by different things. I'm no longer writer based. I'm more art based now. And
oh, right.
That's just something that's changed. I've noticed has changed for me over the last few years. And also, I do, as I said, I do enjoy a more kind of politically kind of minded book, whether or not I'm able to kind of always articulate that. I don't think I am. But now, speaking of books, we've got to talk about Data and Doctor Doom, an empirical approach to transmedia characters. Can you sort of encapsulate for us, especially the idiots like me, what that book is about.
What it's about. I do my best. So
No pressure.
well, basically, the book is based on my PhD. So I did my PhD at University of the Arts London, where I also work now. I didn't work there when I started it, and it was the research I was doing. It was trying to get an idea of how transmedia characters work. So, I think so. For instance, right now, I think today as we're talking, Absolute Batman has come out, and that's a story where they've taken aspects of Batman and completely changed them. And they said Batman is not a billionaire anymore. I haven't read it yet, but they've changed it. And it's like, and we as consumers understand you've changed this character. So it's like it's trying to look at it and go, well, what are the components? What is it that makes Batman Batman? What is it that makes Sherlock Holmes, or any of these characters that exist in different media? It's like, with the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, they're like going, here's loads of Spider-Mans, or Spider's-Men, if you prefer. And you sort of think, how is this working? What happens when you change a bit of a character? And what are the aspects of a character you would change? And I come from a medical statistics background. I spent 25 years working in medical statistics. And so I sort of assumed there would be a way of doing this that somebody working in comic studies had done. And there wasn't. So what I did was I looked at all the different ways, and there were lots of them, that scholars had tried to categorize how a character works. What is it that makes a character? And I used Dr. Doom as my case study for trying to work this out, because Dr. Doom, I was looking at him from 1962 to 1987 for reasons I won't go into here, because that's a whole other story. But from 1960 to 1987,
John Byrne.
John Byrne's in the middle of it. It's the Marvel. I was basically looking at it because that is what I determined was the Marvel Age. When people talk about the Marvel Age, let's not get into that one. No, but
that's fine.
that's too much. That's too much for anybody. This or any time of day. But so what I did was, because Doctor Doom appears in lots of different media, lots of different series, he would make a great snapshot to try and do this. So that's why Doctor Doom is the case study that I used there for this. What I call it's called a unified catalogue of transmedia character components. I couldn't think of a snappier name than that. Unfortunately, I spent a lot of time trying to do it. And it basically says what you do is that any transmedia character can be put. There are 4 types of components. So you look at things to do with the character themselves. So what they're called, what they look like, things like that. The story world they exist in. So that's locations in the story world, or objects in the story world, or other characters. The third one is how they behave within that story world. So that's their motivations, their personality traits, and what other people think they're like. And then finally, you look at, because they're fictional characters, you look at the authorship. So that's the people who actually create their stories and the people or organizations who are credited with that. So in that one, for instance, you might say, well, a character, does it matter if Mickey Mouse is produced by Disney or not? That's part of the authorship of that character. And if that changes, what changes there? So it's like, it's kind of, hopefully, I was going to say it sounds more complicated than it is. It actually is more complicated than I've made it sound there. But there are 13 different aspects that fit into these 4 categories of a character. And what I did was I looked at 69 texts. You can tell that what I did was done by pure empirical methodology, because if I had any say in it, I would not have chosen 69 texts. I would have chosen 70 and avoided sneering academics for 5 years. But 69 it was. And for those 69 texts, I went into each of them and looked at all of these 13 aspects and recorded them in a data set. And by doing that, that generates a big data set that then you can analyze and say, well, what happens with Doctor Doom over time and over media? And you find out things like, well, Doctor Doom was quite surprisingly coherent as he moved through different media. So he was the same in cartoons as he was in comics at the time. But you can see that over time, Doctor Doom does change. And because you've got all this data, the great thing about doing this empirical methodology is I can say there are three very clear different periods of Doctor Doom from 1962 to 1987. There's an initial period, then there's a middle period when he's things change. And then there's the end of it when it's Secret Wars and things like that. And you can show very clearly that he does change during that period. And then you can go and do sort of qualitative analysis of it and say, well, what's going on during this period? Why has he changed? So the idea is it generates a methodology for doing that. And then I am going to stop for breath in a moment. And then finally, the point of it all is, so if you can then have an empirical methodology that can generate a data set of Doctor Doom, you can also apply that to a different character. So in the book, I then do that about Dennis the Menace. And you can say, okay, the same thing works with Dennis the Menace. And in the book, I look at both versions, the American and the British version of Dennis the Menace. And you can say, empirically, here are the differences between them. Spoilers, our Dennis is great. The American Dennis is an annoying little twerp that would have been murdered in real life by anybody who came into contact with him. But then the idea is, but then you can then carry that on to other characters. So I'm doing Judge Dredd next and hopefully Donald Duck. And then you can say, by doing the same methodology, not only can you then analyze those characters across time and media, but then you can start to compare different characters and say, what does this tell us about transmedia characters as a whole? And again, and because it's empirical, doesn't need to be me. It can be anybody doing it.
And and how many characters do you think you'd have to kind of collect data on to sort of arrive at a definitive answer, if that's possible?
I think you'd have to do quite a few. I mean, I think if you started to get into calling it definitive, then sorry, my very dreary stats head is, well, you'd have to look for a you'd have to do a sample of all transmedia characters and work out what proportion of them. So quite a lot, yeah. I think.
Probably a bit too big for.
It's a big, but it's well, I'll send you the link, because my data that the data that I've generated is available open access. Yeah. It's stored on the University Arts London data repository, so anybody can go and get that data and use it and analyze it. And there's a rough guide there as well to how the tool works as well. So the idea is that anybody could do this.
Could we put that in like, would we have permission to put that in the?
Oh, please do.
Yeah,
please do. Yeah,
description, and it's not going to be a problem. That's
no problem at all. No, that'd be fantastic.
As long as I just didn't want to upset the university. Or
we're all about the open access data and using our data. I also, my day job is running the data repository, so I can tell you that the person who runs that is fine with it. He's fine with it.
And there is, of course, the book is available. If people wanted to get that, they can get that online or the bookshops.
The book is extremely available. Rarely has there been a book more available than my book. I think my duty responsibility. At the moment, it's out in hardback by an academic publisher, so it costs £89.99 at the moment.
Right.
So, it is more available if you have access to a library. It's very much available. Most libraries will be able to give you access to it for free.
Cool.
And that way through their licenses.
We'll put the link, we're purchasing link on there anyway, because we believe in helping out.
Any eccentric billionaires who are listening, buy them for your friends for Christmas. That would be my preferred way.
10 copies. 10.
Yeah. Don't build an arsenal of crime fighting equipment. Buy my book instead.
It seems a lot more kind of benevolent, doesn't it?
I thought so.
Than indeed taking over a small country. But lastly, I've got to ask, just on. Or, just for the pure fun of it, how are you feeling about the possibility of Robert Downey Jr. portraying your beloved Doctor Doom, or a version of him in an upcoming Marvel film? They haven't actually specified, when he's going to play this. In fact, isn't it just that he took off the mask and that was it? That was as far as that got.
Well, the only piece of information we have about it is that Robert Downey Jr. has specifically said he's playing Victor Von Doom.
Right. Okay.
Because he loves complicated characters. That's it. That's all we've got. And obviously, there's a slight hint that the Secret Wars film is called Secret Wars Doomsday, isn't it? So that's quite a big clue there. But I'm really excited about it. I'm really, really excited about it, because I've spent the past 8 years having with people going, Doctor Who? Yes, no, Doctor Doom. Yes. Doom the game. Go, no. It's great for me. But I think the fantastic thing, the most exciting thing is the casting of Robert Downey Jr. is so great because it says to people that this is obviously it's better for Doctor Doom, because it says to people, clearly this is an important character, because they're not going to get Robert Downey Jr. in to play. Well, I was going to say some minor character like Kang the Conqueror, but they did get somebody big in to play Kang the Conqueror, which was mad. But I mean, they've got it. Clearly Doctor Doom must be important because Robert Downey Jr. is playing him. How they do it, I mean, obviously, like everybody, I've got my own theory about how they could do it. It involves Howard Stark traveling to Latveria as a young soldier and impregnating a young woman, and that means that then there you go. Then Doctor Doom's still Doctor Doom, and it all works. It all works.
Do you think a child out of wedlock will fit with the Disney ethos? I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. But yeah, I'm really excited about it because it obviously means that Marvel are going, okay, we're going to go big on Doctor Doom. There's going to be a lot of Doctor Doom stuff coming. He's going to be a really big character. I love Doctor Doom. I mean, and I don't mind. Like we were saying earlier, obviously this Doctor Doom is going to be different from the Doctor Doom that Jerry Conway and Gene Colan did, or whoever else I've loved who has done it. It's going to be different, but that's fine because it's a movie, not a comic book. A different thing will happen, and I'm excited to see how they do it. As long as he says Richards at some point, I'll be happy.
I think that comics the films would be extremely boring if they exactly kind of copied the comics. As much as I love the comics, I think that the movies are their own thing and are all the better for it. And for a lot of us, including me, because I grew up with DC and not Marvel, it's become my introduction to so many of the characters. And I'm really grateful for that because it means I'm reading more comics. I'm also really upset about that because it means I'm buying more comics.
Yeah.
But I think they do serve as an interesting intro to people that to characters that you've never heard of, or a fictional world that you've never kind of considered being part of. Mark, I want to thank you for this because it's been utterly fascinating and really not what I was expecting.
Oh, good.
Very, I think you've got a lovely way of looking at these characters and the worlds that they inhabit, and I think we'd like to hear from you again at some stage. Perhaps when the movie finally makes it, or when Doctor Doom makes his first appearance, we could have you on again. And
thanks for having me. As you can tell, I've got a lot of Doctor Doom to get off my chest.
Yeah. You should do a regular column like that should be This Week in Doctor Doom. I mean, surely. Are you excited for the One World Under Doom, which I think is coming in 2025?
That looks
Marvel's big event.
Yeah, that looks really interesting. I'm gonna have to get my pull list going again for that one. I think, but I think that hopefully that's going to give us hints of what's to come. I think, isn't it? Yeah,
certainly. I mean, they do seem to be bringing the comics and the films more in line, which is both a good and a bad thing, And obviously, one does feel a pang of sympathy for everyone who had pitched Kang stories for the next 2 or 3 years.
Oh, crumbs! Yes, there'll be a lot of them lying around, aren't there?
Yeah. Although since the characters are loosely connected, I'd like to see both of them featured. But that's not up to the like of us. But Mark, I do want to thank you for this. I really appreciate you giving me time and coming on and doing this. It's certainly been one of the more kind of fascinating adjacent, I guess, conversations that we've done, and I really appreciate you coming on and doing that. So, Dr. Mark Hibbett, thank you so very much for coming on, and you can get Data and Doctor Doom, an empirical approach to transmedia characters from Palgrave Macmillan. If that tickles your fancy, you can grab that we'll find a link for you guys, and we'll put it in there, and we'll also put a link to Mark's data. So if you want to take an interest or try your hand at sort of analysing that data for yourselves or applying it to another character. I'm sure you would be very grateful if you want to check in and tell us what your findings are. I'd certainly appreciate that, and it'd be something very different for the Comic Crush. Remember to check out the Comic Crush website and the Comic Crush shop for more on Doctor Doom. There's certainly some Doctor Doom comics in the web shop now, if that's where your fascination goes. And yeah, lots of Marvel and of course DC there as well. So Mark, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone out there listening. Goodbye.